The city rises from the waters, like a crown of stone resting between two worlds. To the west lies Europe, with its forests, rivers, and restless kingdoms. To the east lies Asia, vast and ancient, where caravans stretch across deserts and empires shimmer like mirages. At this meeting place stood a city called Byzantium, later known as Constantinople, the queen of cities, for more than 1,000 years. Her walls gazed across the Bosphorus, watching the tides of history flow. From humble fishermen casting their nets on a rocky shore, to emperors clad in purple robes, directing armies and building churches of soaring domes. Byzantium became a bridge of civilizations. Here, the wisdom of Greece met the faith of Christianity. Here, Roman law endured long after Rome itself had fallen to ruin. And here, mosaics glimmered in golden light while armies battered at the gates. The story of Byzantium is one of survival and splendor, of faith and fire. It is the tale of a people who stood at the crossroad of continents, preserving the memory of the ancient world even as they forged a new one. Tonight, let us drift back across the centuries and fall asleep to the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire. Long before emperors wrapped themselves in purple and bishops crowned the city with churches, Byzantium began as a modest colony around 657 BC. Greek settlers from Megara sailed across the wine-dark waters of the Aegean, seeking fortune and a new home. They chose a rocky promontory by the Bosphorus, where the waters of the Black Sea flowed into the Mediterranean. The site was no accident. It commanded both sea and land, a place where ships could anchor and armies could march between continents. The settlers called their new city Byzantion, after their leader Byzas. The legend said he had consulted the oracle of Delphi, who instructed him to build his city opposite the land of the blind. When he arrived at this site, he realized what the oracle meant. On the Asian shore, the ancient city of Chalcedon had been founded earlier, but its people had ignored the far superior location across the strait. Byzas declared them blind for overlooking such a prize. Thus, Byzantium was born with destiny written in its stones. In those early centuries, Byzantium was not the glittering empire of later memory. It was a modest trading post, living off the sea, fishing and commerce. Yet even then, its harbor, the Golden Horn, offered shelter to fleets, and its position made it a toll gate for ships moving grain from the Black Sea to the hungry cities of Greece. Wealth trickled into its markets, and merchants carried not only goods but also stories, beliefs, and customs. Byzantium became a place of exchange, of mingling tongues and cultures. By the 4th century AD, the Roman Empire was cracking under its own weight. Barbarian tribes pressed upon the frontiers. Civil wars drained its strength. Rome itself, once eternal, felt vulnerable. In this age of uncertainty, Emperor Constantine looked eastward. He saw the promise of Byzantium's peninsula, a place easier to defend, closer to the rich provinces of Asia Minor and the vital grain routes of Egypt. In 330 AD, he declared Byzantium reborn as Nova Roma, the new Rome. Yet the name that endured was Constantinople, the city of Constantine. From that moment, the fate of Byzantium changed forever. No longer a small colony, it became the capital of an empire, Marble from distant quarries was hauled to build palaces and forums. Aqueducts carried fresh water into the city. The great hippodrome rose, echoing with the roar of chariots and the cheers of tens of thousands. Most of all, the city was crowned with churches. For Constantine embraced Christianity, once a persecuted faith, now a power that would shape empires. For those who entered Constantinople in its early centuries, the city was a vision. Its walls, stretching across the land, promised security. Its harbors teemed with ships from every sea. Markets overflowed with spices, silks, and gold. And yet, within those same walls, the people struggled to reconcile two worlds, the old traditions of Rome and Greece, and the new, rising force of Christian belief. The Byzantines, though heirs of Rome, began to see themselves differently. They spoke Greek rather than Latin. They cherished philosophy and theology, weaving them into daily life. They called their emperor not merely ruler but God's chosen, a living symbol of divine order on earth. Slowly, a new identity was forged, not Roman, not Greek, but something in between. This was the beginning of what we call Byzantium. Still, the early centuries were fragile. The empire faced rebellions, invasions, and the constant danger of division. But Constantinople held firm. Its location was its greatest weapon, and its walls, rebuilt and expanded, became a shield against the storms of history. By the 5th century, when Rome itself had fallen to barbarian hordes, Constantinople still stood, a beacon of civilization in a world descending into darkness. The story of Byzantium's foundations is not only about stone walls and imperial decrees, it is about survival. A fishing village turned colony, a colony turned capital, and a capital turned empire. A city that could have been forgotten by history instead became the very thread that tied the ancient and medieval worlds together. And this was only the beginning. In the 6th century, a single man dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire. His name was Justinian, and he wore the crown of Byzantium with an ambition larger than the empire itself. Born not in a palace, but in a humble village of the Balkans, he rose through talent and determination, guided by an uncle who had already climbed from peasant origins to the throne. When Justinian inherited the diadem, he believed he had a divine mission to reunite the lands Rome had lost and to leave behind a city that would shine brighter than any in history. Constantinople at that time was already a marvel, but under Justinian, it became something greater. The emperor ordered the codification of Roman law, gathering centuries of decrees and traditions into a single body of texts, the Corpus Juris Civilis. It was more than law, it was order, logic, and justice preserved for the future. Even today, much of Europe's legal foundation traces its roots to Justinian's code. But the emperor was not remembered for scrolls and decrees alone. He was remembered for stone. In the very heart of the city, he commissioned a building that defied imagination, the Hagia Sophia. After riots had burned much of Constantinople in 532, Justinian declared that a new church would rise, greater than any before it. Architects Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus stretched their genius to its limits, designing a dome that seemed to float like heaven itself. When the emperor first stepped inside, he gazed upward at the vast canopy of gold and light and whispered, "Solomon, I have outdone you. To stand within the Hagia Sophia was to feel the weight of heaven pressing gently upon earth. Mosaics glittered in golden hues. Light streamed through windows hidden in arches, making the dome hover like a miracle. For the people of Byzantium, this was proof that God's hand guided their empire for centuries to come. Travelers would speak of the Hagia Sophia with awe, calling it a wonder of the world. Yet, Justinian's ambitions reached far beyond the city walls. He dispatched generals to reclaim lost provinces. In the west, his brilliant commander Belisarius swept through North Africa, toppling the Vandal kingdom. From there, his armies crossed into Italy, battling Ostrogoths and restoring Rome itself to imperial rule. For a brief moment, the Mediterranean once again seemed a Roman lake, and Justinian's dream of a united empire flickered to life. But dreams are costly. War drained the treasury. Plagues ravaged the population, cutting down citizens by the tens of thousands. The empire, stretched thin, struggled to hold on to its conquests. Italy, won at such cost, was left devastated, its cities ruined by years of conflict. The reconquest had brought glory, but it had also brought exhaustion. Through it all, one figure stood beside Justinian: Theodora, his wife, his partner, and one of the most remarkable women of history. Born to humble beginnings, once an actress and dancer, she rose to become empress. Intelligent and fiercely determined, she advised Justinian in matters of state and faith. During the Great Nika riots, when mobs filled the hippodrome and threatened to overthrow the emperor, Justinian faltered. It was Theodora who spoke words that changed history. "Purple makes the noblest shroud," she declared, refusing to flee. With her courage, Justinian rallied his forces, crushed the rebellion, and held his throne. Together, Justinian and Theodora left an indelible mark on Byzantium. They expanded the empire, reformed its laws, and adorned its capital with monuments that still stand today. Their reign was an age of brilliance, but also of strain, a golden age gilded with both triumph and tragedy. When Justinian died in 565, the empire he left was larger, richer, and more splendid than when he had taken the crown. Yet it was also fragile, its people weary, its enemies watchful. The golden glow of his reign would cast long shadows in the centuries to come. Still, for Byzantium, the age of Justinian was a peak, a moment when the empire stood tall, when its rulers dared to dream of greatness, and when its capital became a beacon to the world. The Hagia Sophia's dome still rose against the sky, a reminder that for a time, heaven had touched earth. But history does not rest on peaks, and for every rise, there must come a fall. Faith had always been the heart of Byzantium. From the moment Constantine declared Christianity the favored faith of the empire, the city had seen itself as a guardian of divine truth. Within its walls, bishops debated mysteries of the soul, emperors convened councils, and the people lived in the rhythm of the church calendar. Fasts, feasts, and processions filled their days. Icons glimmered in candlelight, and prayers rose like incense into the great domes of the city. But faith, while a source of unity, could also become a source of division. The Byzantine world was filled with questions of theology that to outsiders might seem abstract. Yet to believers were matters of life, death, and salvation. Was Christ of one nature, or two? How divine? How human could his image be painted? Or was that a blasphemy? In Byzantium, such debates could ignite streets, topple emperors, and shake the very foundations of the empire. The first great storms came with the Council of Chalcedon in 451. There, bishops declared that Christ was both fully human and fully divine, two natures united in one person. For many in Constantinople, this seemed clear and certain, but not all agreed. Christians in Egypt, Syria, and Armenia rejected the decision, clinging to their own understanding of Christ's nature. To them, Chalcedon was betrayal, and from that moment, the empire's religious unity began to fracture. What had been one faith splintered into rival traditions, each claiming to hold the true light. The emperors of Byzantium often found themselves less shepherds of souls and more managers of quarrels. They tried to heal divisions, to impose unity. But unity proved elusive. To rule Byzantium was to stand in the middle of theological storms, buffeted by rival bishops, passionate monks, and ordinary citizens who argued about doctrine in the streets. Nowhere was the struggle more fierce than in the iconoclast controversy. In the 8th century, a new wave of rulers declared that the use of icons, holy images of Christ, the Virgin, and the saints was idolatry. They ordered icons destroyed, mosaics stripped from churches, frescoes painted over. Soldiers marched into sanctuaries, tearing images from walls, while believers wept and resisted. Monks, who had long defended icons, were imprisoned, beaten, or exiled. For decades, Byzantium was torn between iconoclasts and iconophiles, those who rejected images and those who venerated them. Families split, cities rioted, emperors rose and fell, and yet, beneath all the turmoil, something profound was at stake, the very question of how humans could reach toward the divine. Were images a bridge to heaven, or a dangerous distraction? At last, in 843, Empress Theodora, widow of the Emperor Theophilos, restored the veneration of icons. The Church celebrated a festival still remembered as the triumph of orthodoxy. From then on, icons filled Byzantine churches once more, shimmering with gold and color, offering believers a window into eternity. The controversy had scarred the empire, but it had also defined it. Byzantium emerged with a stronger identity, convinced that it alone guarded the true form of Christian worship. Yet the greatest division of all lay not within the empire, but between East and West. For centuries, the Church of Constantinople had shared the faith with the Church of Rome. They prayed to the same God, read the same scriptures, and honored the same saints. But differences grew subtle at first, then sharp. The Byzantines spoke Greek, while the Romans spoke Latin. The Byzantines crowned their emperors with divine authority, while Rome crowned popes as supreme shepherds. Even small rituals, the kind of bread used in communion, the words added to creeds became points of bitter dispute. By the 11th century, tensions could no longer be bridged. In 1054, legates from the Pope marched into Hagia Sophia during the liturgy and laid a bull of excommunication upon the altar. The Patriarch of Constantinople answered with his own excommunication. The two halves of Christendom, Roman Catholic in the west, Eastern Orthodox in the east, were now divided. What we call the Great Schism was not one moment but centuries of drift, misunderstandings, and rival claims. Yet its final rupture was devastating. The unity of Christendom, which Byzantium had long seen itself as upholding, was broken. For the people of Constantinople, the schism meant more than distant quarrels. It meant that the empire now stood alone, isolated from its Western brothers. When dangers pressed from the east, when armies marched against the city, help from the Latin West would no longer come easily or without a price. The split left Byzantium vulnerable, a spiritual and political island between rival worlds, still within its walls. Faith endured. Monks chanted in their cloisters. Pilgrims kissed icons in candlelight. The liturgy of Hagia Sophia rose in clouds of incense, uniting voices, hearts, and souls. For Byzantium, faith was not just belief, it was identity, woven into every stone and every heartbeat of the city. But divisions, once opened, cannot easily be healed. The schism would cast a long shadow, shaping the empire's fate in centuries yet to come. And even as Byzantium prayed for unity, new storms were already gathering on the horizon. By the end of the 11th century, Byzantium stood at a crossroads of peril. To the east, the rising power of the Seljuk Turks pressed hard upon Anatolia, once the heartland of the empire. To the west, relations with Rome had fractured, leaving Constantinople isolated from its Latin neighbors. The empire, though still rich and magnificent, was shrinking, its borders receding like a tide. It was in this moment of crisis that Emperor Alexios I Komnenos looked westward for help. His armies were stretched thin. The once mighty Byzantine legions could no longer stand alone against waves of Turkish horsemen. In 1095, Alexios sent envoys to the Pope in Rome, asking for mercenaries to fight under Byzantine command. He expected a trickle of knights, perhaps a few thousand seasoned warriors. What arrived was a flood. The call of the Pope had stirred not only soldiers but entire peoples. Kings, lords, peasants, even monks took up the cross, believing they were marching on a holy mission to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule. What began as a plea for mercenaries became the First Crusade, a tidal wave of humanity moving eastward. When the Crusaders reached Constantinople, the city had never seen such a sight. Tens of thousands crowded its gates, men clad in chainmail, bearing banners marked with the cross, their languages strange to Byzantine ears. Some were noble knights, disciplined and armed. Others were ragged pilgrims, hungry and desperate. The people of Constantinople watched with awe and unease, for these were allies, but also strangers, barbarous in their manners, fervent in their faith, and unpredictable in their passions. Alexios, ever cautious, welcomed the leaders of the crusade with honor, but also with calculation. He required them to swear oaths of loyalty, promising that any lands recovered from the Turks would be returned to the empire. Many of the Crusader lords agreed, though not all with sincerity. Suspicion hung in the air. For Byzantines and Latins did not trust one another. Byzantium saw the Crusaders as unruly guests, dangerous as much as useful. The Crusaders saw the Byzantines as cunning schemers, half-hearted in their piety. Yet together they marched. With Byzantine ships ferrying them across the Bosphorus, the Crusaders stormed into Anatolia, retaking cities and fortresses. For a time, it seemed the alliance worked. The First Crusade, against all odds, reached Jerusalem in 1099, capturing the Holy City in a storm of blood and zeal. Latin kingdoms were established across the Levant, and the Byzantines regained portions of Asia Minor, but mistrust lingered. The Byzantines accused the Crusaders of greed, of carving their own realms instead of restoring lands to the empire. The Crusaders accused the Byzantines of treachery, of failing to aid them in their hour of need. What had begun as an alliance of faith was poisoned by rivalry. Over the next century, waves of Crusaders passed through Constantinople. Each time, tensions flared. The city struggled to feed and manage the multitudes that flooded its streets. Rumors spread of Latin arrogance, of insults to Orthodox customs. Latins mocked Greek rituals. Greeks dismissed Latin piety as crude. Bitterness deepened. The breaking point came in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade. What had begun as a mission to the Holy Land twisted into something darker, entangled in Venetian politics and debts. The Crusader army turned its gaze upon Constantinople itself. The city that had once welcomed them as allies became their target. In April, the Crusaders stormed the mighty walls that had defied countless enemies. Against all expectation, they broke through. Constantinople, Queen of Cities, Jewel of the East, was sacked for 3 days. Soldiers looted its treasures, desecrated its churches, and carried off relics that had inspired generations. Horses were stabled in Hagia Sophia. Golden icons were melted down, jewels ripped from altars. The empire, so long a beacon of civilization, was humiliated by those who had once come in the name of Christ. The sack of 1204 was more than a military defeat. It was a wound that never healed. Byzantium, once proud and unbroken, was shattered. A Latin empire was carved out of Constantinople, while Byzantine exiles fled to Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond to preserve fragments of their heritage. For 57 years, the Queen of Cities lay in foreign hands. When the Byzantines finally reclaimed Constantinople in 1261, the empire they restored was a shadow of its former self. The treasures were gone, the population diminished, the confidence broken. Byzantium had survived, but it would never again stand as it had before the Crusaders came. For the people of the city, the memory of Latin betrayal burned deep. The schism between East and West was now etched in fire and steel. Byzantium would never again trust the West, and the West would never again see Byzantium as a true partner. The Crusaders had come as allies. They left as conquerors, and Byzantium, once the bridge of Christendom, now stood as its most bitter divide. When the Byzantines regained Constantinople in 1261, they returned not to the shining capital of old, but to a city broken and weary. The palaces stood half empty, the treasures stripped, the population thinned. Hagia Sophia still rose against the skyline, but its golden mosaics were dulled, its once gleaming marbles fractured. The Queen of Cities had been scarred by betrayal, and though she wore her crown once more, its luster had faded. The empire that Michael VIII Palaiologos reclaimed was no longer the empire of Justinian. Its lands had shrunk, its coffers drained, and its armies weakened. From the west, new powers rose first, the Venetians and Genoese, whose fleets dominated trade, seizing the wealth of the seas once controlled by Byzantium. From the north came the rising kingdoms of Serbia and Bulgaria, pressing upon the empire's borders. And from the east, ever constant, loomed the Turks, who had already tasted the richness of Anatolia. The Byzantines tried to restore what had been lost. Emperors rebuilt walls, sponsored churches, and negotiated alliances. Scholars continued to write, and monks continued to chant. Yet there was an air of fragility, as though the empire now lived on borrowed time. The great capital endured more from memory than from might. Within Constantinople, daily life carried on. Markets bustled, though goods were fewer. Ships still docked in the Golden Horn, though many flew the banners of foreign merchants. The hippodrome stood silent, its crowds long dispersed. Families lit candles before icons, prayed for deliverance, and whispered of the glories of old. Byzantium remained proud, but the pride was brittle. The empire faced new trials with every passing century. In the 14th century, civil wars tore it apart. Dynasties quarreled, princes fought for thrones, and mercenaries stalked the land. In their weakness, emperors often turned to outsiders for aid, inviting Turks, Serbs, and Latins into their struggles. Each bargain bought survival, but at a cost, for foreign powers gained footholds in Byzantine lands. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Turks rose with relentless force. From their stronghold in Anatolia, they crossed into Europe, taking one city after another. Gallipoli, once a gateway of the empire, fell into their hands. The Byzantine heartland shrank to little more than Constantinople itself and a scattering of outposts. The mighty empire of Constantine was reduced to a city-state, its emperors ruling little beyond the shadow of their walls. And yet, Byzantium endured, like an ancient tree, hollowed but still standing. The empire survived storms that might have toppled others. Its culture, its art, and its learning became even more precious in decline. Scholars preserved manuscripts of Homer and Plato. Theologians debated with passion, refining doctrines that still shape the Orthodox Church today. Artists covered church walls with icons that glowed in candlelight, proof that beauty could flourish even in hardship. In those centuries, Byzantium became less an empire of swords than an empire of memory and spirit. The people knew their power was waning, but they also believed their city was chosen, protected by God and by the Virgin Mary, whom they called their guardian. Stories spread of miracles, icons that wept, saints who appeared in visions, unseen angels who defended the walls. Such tales gave comfort, even as the reality outside the walls grew ever darker. At times, hope flickered. Emperors sought alliances with the West, attempting to heal the schism with Rome. Councils were held, creeds were signed, but the people of Constantinople resisted. They feared that union with Rome meant betrayal of their faith. Better the Sultan's turban than the cardinal's hat, they whispered, choosing to preserve orthodoxy even at the risk of conquest. By the 15th century, Constantinople was a ghost of its former self. Once a city of perhaps 500,000, it now held barely 50,000 souls. Vast stretches of the city lay in ruins, gardens growing where palaces had once stood. The empire's treasury was nearly empty. Its armies reduced to a few thousand men. The emperor still held court in the old palaces, but the grandeur was gone, replaced by the quiet dignity of endurance. Still, the walls stood, the mighty Theodosian walls, which had defied Persians, Arabs, Bulgarians, and countless others, still rose unbroken. Behind them, the people of Constantinople carried on, clinging to the hope that the Queen of Cities would never fall. But history moves with its own tide, and even the strongest walls cannot hold it back forever. The Ottomans grew stronger each year, their armies larger, their cannons heavier, and in the distance, the final storm was gathering, one that would test the very soul of Byzantium. The empire had survived centuries of loss, humiliation, and decline. But now, the question was no longer how long it could endure. It was whether it could endure at all. In the spring of 1453, the people of Constantinople woke each morning to the sound of drums echoing across the plain. Beyond the walls, the banners of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II fluttered in the wind. His army stretched as far as the eye could see, tens of thousands of soldiers, janissaries trained since childhood, cavalry armored in steel, and, most ominous of all, cannons cast from bronze, the largest the world had ever seen. Inside the walls, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos walked among his people. He was no emperor of vast lands or endless wealth. His realm had shrunk to the city itself. Yet he wore his crown with dignity. He encouraged his soldiers, reminded his people of their heritage, and prayed in Hagia Sophia beneath the glittering mosaics. He knew the odds. He knew the city was outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from aid. But he also knew that Constantinople was no ordinary city. It was the heart of 1,000 years of history, the last flame of Rome. The siege began in April. Day after day, the great Ottoman cannons roared, hurling stones against the Theodosian walls. The ground shook with each strike, dust rising in clouds. For centuries, those walls had been the shield of Christendom. Now they cracked under the thunder of gunpowder. Still, the defenders fought on. Greek soldiers, Venetian sailors, and even a few volunteers from distant lands manned the battlements. Women carried water and stones. Priests blessed the fighters, and the city's bells rang out in defiance. At night, torches glowed along the ramparts. The people of Constantinople prayed in the streets, singing hymns that echoed into the darkness. They believed the Virgin Mary, long their protector, would not abandon them now. Some whispered of visions, angels walking the walls, saints watching from above. Hope lingered. fragile but unbroken. Mehmed, only 21 years old, was relentless. He pressed the siege with determination, ordering assaults again and again. His soldiers scaled ladders, hurled fire, and clashed at the gates. But the Byzantines resisted with courage. For weeks, the city endured. Each time a section of wall crumbled, the defenders rushed to rebuild it with earth, wood, and stone. Each time the Ottomans advanced, they were thrown back with arrows, boiling oil, and desperate strength. But strength has limits. By late May, the walls were scarred, the people exhausted, and food scarce. The sea, once Constantinople's lifeline, was blocked by Ottoman ships dragged overland into the Golden Horn. Cutting off the last route of supply, the defenders knew the end was near. On the night of May 28th, the people gathered in Hagia Sophia for one final liturgy. The emperor, nobles, soldiers, and common folk stood together under the vast dome, candles flickering in the shadows. They prayed as one, voices rising to the heavens. Some wept, some whispered farewell to their city. In that moment, divisions vanished. Latin and Greek, noble and peasant, all were simply Byzantines, united in their final hour. Before dawn, the assault began. Ottoman cannons opened fire with thunder. Waves of soldiers surged forward. The defenders fought with fury, but the walls could no longer hold. At the gate of St. Romanos, a breach opened. The Janissaries poured through. Emperor Constantine XI was last seen casting aside his imperial regalia, crying out, "The city is fallen, but I am still alive." He charged into the melee, disappearing into legend. No body was ever found. By morning, the banners of Mehmed II flew over the towers. The Queen of Cities had fallen. The streets echoed with the clash of steel, the cries of the conquered, and the sound of victory drums. Hagia Sophia, once filled with prayers, now filled with silence as the conquerors entered. The great church was consecrated anew, transformed into a mosque, its mosaics hidden beneath plaster, its bells silenced for the world. The fall of Constantinople was a turning point. To the west, it marked the end of the Middle Ages, for the last remnant of Rome was gone. To the east, it marked the rise of the Ottoman Empire, a power that would dominate for centuries. For Byzantium itself, it was the final chapter of a thousand-year story, a story of glory and struggle, of faith and endurance. Yet even in defeat, Byzantium left a legacy. Its scholars fled westward, carrying with them manuscripts of Greek philosophy and science. Their knowledge helped ignite the Renaissance in Europe. Its church endured, preserving the Orthodox faith across Eastern lands, and its memory lingered, a reminder that empires rise and fall, but their spirit lives on. As the sun set on May 29th, Itensubai Wushasan, Constantinople was no longer Byzantine, yet in the hearts of those who loved her, she remained the Queen of Cities, eternal in memory, if not in stone. When the walls of Constantinople finally fell, the empire was gone. But Byzantium's spirit did not die. Empires may crumble, but ideas travel, and from the ashes of the Queen of Cities, seeds were scattered that would take root across continents, shaping the modern world in ways its last citizens could scarcely imagine. One of Byzantium's greatest gifts was its faith. The Orthodox Church, nourished for centuries in the streets and sanctuaries of Constantinople, spread far beyond the Bosphorus. From the 9th century onward, missionaries like St. Cyril and St. Methodius carried Byzantine Christianity north into the Slavic lands. They devised the Cyrillic alphabet, giving written language to peoples who had none, and with it the capacity to preserve their culture. To this day, millions in Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, and beyond write in letters born from Byzantine devotion. The Orthodox liturgy, with its soaring hymns, incense, and icons, remains one of the empire's most enduring legacies. In Russia, the domes of Moscow's cathedrals rose in imitation of Hagia Sophia. In the Balkans, monasteries carved into mountains echoed Byzantine chants. Even as the empire vanished, its spiritual rhythm pulsed across half the world. Another legacy lay in law and governance. Justinian's great codification, the Corpus Juris Civilis, was copied, studied, and preserved long after his empire was gone. In the universities of medieval Europe, students pored over Byzantine legal texts, shaping the civil law traditions that still govern much of the modern world. The idea that law should be systematic, rational, and universal was a Byzantine inheritance. Byzantium also carried forward the heritage of the ancient Greeks and Romans. While Western Europe descended into what some call the Dark Ages, the libraries of Constantinople safeguarded manuscripts of Plato, Aristotle, Hippocrates, and countless others. When the city fell in 1453, many of these works traveled west with fleeing scholars. They arrived in Italy, France, and beyond, sparking the Renaissance, a rebirth of learning that transformed Europe. In this sense, the fall of Byzantium became a bridge to modernity. Its art and architecture left their own indelible mark. Byzantine mosaics, glowing with gold and color, influenced generations of artists. Icons, with their serene faces and luminous halos, taught believers to see the divine reflected in human form. The domed church, perfected in Hagia Sophia, became a model for sacred architecture from Russia to Turkey. Even today, when travelers step into a church crowned with a dome, they walk in Byzantium's shadow. Byzantium also shaped the very idea of empire and kingship. The Byzantine emperor was seen as God's chosen representative on earth, a sacred figure as much as a political one. This fusion of spiritual and temporal authority influenced rulers far beyond Constantinople. Russian Tsars called Moscow the Third Rome, claiming to inherit the mantle of the fallen empire. In Western Europe, monarchs looked eastward, measuring their own crowns against the legacy of Constantine. Yet perhaps Byzantium's greatest legacy is its endurance itself. For over 1,000 years, the empire stood as a bridge between worlds, between East and West, ancient and medieval, pagan and Christian. It absorbed shocks that might have destroyed others' invasions, plagues, schisms, betrayals. Each time, it bent but did not break, until the final storm came. Its survival preserved the thread of civilization through centuries of turmoil, even in defeat. Byzantium inspired awe. Travelers who entered Constantinople after 1453 spoke of its ruins with reverence, as though they were walking among the bones of giants. To later historians, Byzantium became both a cautionary tale and a source of fascination, an empire accused of intrigue and decadence, yet admired for its brilliance and resilience. And for the descendants of Byzantium's people, memory became a nation of its own. Greek poets, centuries later, sang of the lost city, longing for Constantinople as if it were a living mother. In Orthodox liturgies, prayers still rise for Hagia Sophia. Once the greatest church in Christendom, the empire may be gone, but its memory endures in faith, in culture, in the quiet yearning of millions. Today, when we speak of Byzantium, we speak of more than a fallen empire. We speak of law and learning, faith and beauty, resilience and memory. We speak of a civilization that linked the wisdom of the ancients to the promise of the modern world. And though the city has changed names, though Hagia Sophia's domes now echo with different prayers, though the empire has passed into history, Byzantium lives on in alphabets, in laws, in art, in song, and in the human spirit that refuses to be forgotten. For in the end, Byzantium was not just a place on the map, it was a bridge of time itself, carrying the past into the future. When the great walls of Constantinople finally crumbled in 1453, the empire was gone, but its fall sent ripples far beyond the Bosphorus, like a shattered vessel spilling its treasure into the sea. Byzantium poured its knowledge, art, and spirit into Europe at the very moment the continent was ready to awaken. Out of loss came rebirth, and that rebirth was the Renaissance. For centuries, Byzantine scholars had preserved the wisdom of antiquity. In the scriptoriums of Constantinople, monks copied works of Plato, Aristotle, and Galen. Libraries guarded ancient texts that had vanished elsewhere. When the city fell, these treasures did not perish with it. Instead, scholars fled westward, carrying manuscripts, memories, and methods of thought. Some went to Italy, where city-states like Florence, Venice, and Rome were already beginning to stir with artistic and intellectual curiosity. Among these exiles was Gemistus Pletho, a philosopher who reignited interest in Plato at a time when Aristotle had long dominated Western learning. His lectures in Florence inspired a new Platonic academy, where thinkers like Marsilio Ficino blended Christian faith with Greek philosophy, weaving ideas that reshaped the intellectual world. Others, like Cardinal Bessarion, donated vast libraries of Greek manuscripts to Venice, ensuring that the voices of antiquity would continue to speak. The impact of Byzantium was not confined to books. Artists, too, felt its influence. Byzantine art, with its glowing icons and mosaics, had long emphasized symbolic meaning, stylized form, and spiritual depth. Italian painters absorbed this heritage, but they transformed it, adding realism, perspective, and human emotion. The result was a fusion, the symbolic richness of Byzantium combined with the naturalism of the West. Giotto, Fra Angelico, and later Michelangelo all painted in a world enriched by Byzantine color and vision. Architecture also bore the mark of Byzantium. The domes perfected in Constantinople inspired architects across Europe, Renaissance builders, experimenting with space and light, studied the Hagia Sophia as a model of harmony between heaven and earth. When Filippo Brunelleschi raised the Great Dome of Florence's cathedral, he was answering a challenge first posed in Byzantium. Nor was the influence limited to art and philosophy. The fall of Constantinople also reshaped trade and exploration. For centuries, Byzantium had been a bridge between East and West, a marketplace where silks, spices, and ideas flowed. With the Ottomans now controlling that bridge, Europeans sought new routes to the riches of Asia. Portuguese ships sailed down the coast of Africa. Spanish caravels turned west across the Atlantic. In a way, the fall of Byzantium pushed Europe toward the Age of Discovery. Columbus's voyage to the New World was part of the same chain of consequences that began when the Ottoman banners rose over Constantinople. Byzantine music. 2. Left. Echoes. The chant of the Orthodox Church, with its haunting tones and layered harmonies, influenced Western sacred music. Renaissance composers, blending polyphony with ancient modes, created sounds that carried faint whispers of Hagia Sophia's liturgy. Perhaps most importantly, Byzantium transmitted an attitude toward knowledge. In the empire's long decline, scholars had clung to learning as a lifeline, believing that preserving wisdom was itself a form of survival. This reverence for the written word, for careful study and commentary, passed into the Renaissance. Humanists in Italy took up the Byzantine torch, editing texts, studying languages, and building a culture that valued the past as a guide to the future. It is no exaggeration to say that without Byzantium, the Renaissance might have bloomed later, or differently, or not at all. The empire that once seemed a relic of the past became, in its final act, a midwife of modern Europe. The flame it carried through centuries of darkness was handed on just as its own body perished. Even today, echoes remain. When we speak of Renaissance art, Renaissance law, Renaissance science, we speak of a moment fertilized by Byzantine roots. The domes of Florence and Rome, the pages of philosophy, the canvases of painters all carry traces of the Queen of Cities. Byzantium did not vanish into silence. It transformed, through its scholars, its art, its faith. It flowed into the bloodstream of Europe. The Renaissance was not the death of Byzantium, but its resurrection in another form, thus, in a strange and poetic way. The fall of Constantinople was also a beginning. Out of the ruins of one empire rose the ideas that would shape the modern world. The city had fallen, but its spirit had escaped the walls, free at last to roam across continents and centuries. Though the empire itself fell more than 5 centuries ago, Byzantium has never truly vanished. Its echoes resound in churches and palaces, in rituals and laws, in alphabets and ideas. To trace its influence is to realize that Byzantium lives not as a relic, but as a quiet presence woven into the fabric of the modern world. Perhaps the clearest echo lies in the Orthodox Church. Across Eastern Europe, Russia, the Balkans, and the Middle East, millions still pray with words, gestures, and melodies that Byzantines once used. The Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, sung in Constantinople for more than 1,000 years, is sung still in Greek, in Slavonic, in Arabic, in English. The chant rises, incense curls through domes, and icons shimmer in flickering candlelight. Each service is a thread linking the present to the empire that first gave it form. The architecture of worship also carries the mark of Byzantium, the onion domes of Moscow, the painted monasteries of Romania, the cathedrals of Serbia all stand as descendants of Hagia Sophia. Even after centuries of change, their symmetry and symbolism echo the Byzantine vision of heaven brought to earth. Language itself bears traces of the empire. The Cyrillic alphabet, born from Byzantine missionaries, remains the written script of vast nations. From Moscow to Sofia, from Kiev to Belgrade, entire literatures flow through letters designed to spread the gospel from Constantinople. Every schoolchild learning Cyrillic today continues a legacy set in motion over 1,000 years ago. In law and governance, too, Byzantium left a mark. Justinian's codification of Roman law, filtered through Byzantine interpretation, became the backbone of civil law across Europe. The very idea that rulers are bound by a written legal code, an inheritance from both Rome and Byzantium, remains central to modern states. Whenever courts cite principles of equity, precedent, and rational order, they unknowingly echo Constantinople's scribes. Even in political thought, Byzantium lingers. The concept of a sacred ruler, crowned not only by men, but by God, shaped monarchies from Moscow to Vienna. Russian Tsars claimed the title of Caesar Tsar, declaring Moscow the Third Rome. This idea that Byzantium's mantle had passed to them guided Russian identity for centuries, the dream of a holy empire, rooted in Byzantine example, influenced not just politics, but the psychology of nations. In the West, Byzantium's memory was more complex. For centuries, Western historians dismissed it as decadent, a shadow of Rome. The word Byzantine itself became a synonym for intrigue, complexity, and decay. Yet modern scholarship has revealed a truer picture, not decay, but resilience, not corruption, but adaptation. Today, historians recognize Byzantium as a vital bridge that preserved the ancient world and delivered it to the modern age. In culture, Byzantium continues to inspire. Writers and poets evoke its golden domes and tragic fall. Painters and filmmakers recreate its mosaics and emperors. Even video games and novels draw upon its imagery of purple-clad rulers, vast walls, and glittering churches. Byzantium, once accused of being irrelevant, has become a symbol of mystery, endurance, and beauty. And in the very city where it once stood, its legacy remains tangible. Istanbul, vibrant and modern, still carries Byzantium in its stones. Hagia Sophia, whether church, mosque, or museum, remains a monument to the city's layered past. The Theodosian walls still rise in parts, weathered but proud. Walk through the streets of Istanbul, and one walks through Byzantium's ghost, alive in brick and marble. Perhaps most profound is the idea of continuity that Byzantium embodied. For over 1,000 years, while kingdoms rose and fell around it, the empire held fast to the belief that it was Rome reborn, eternal, unbroken, even in decline. Byzantium refused to see itself as finished. That stubborn endurance, that refusal to vanish, is itself a lesson. In the modern world, where nations fear collapse and cultures fear erasure, Byzantium teaches that survival is more than borders, it is memory, faith, and identity. So, when we hear the word Byzantine today, we should not think only of intrigue or decline. We should think of resilience, of light shining in mosaics, of voices rising in ancient chant, of a city that stood between worlds and carried their wisdom across centuries. Byzantium's empire is gone, but its echoes are all around us, whispering in churches, glowing in art, written in alphabets, and embedded in laws. Byzantium's fall was an ending, but its legacy is a beginning without end. When empires vanish, they often leave behind ruins of stone, but Byzantium left behind something stranger, more enduring, an empire of the imagination. For centuries after its fall, poets, painters, and dreamers have wandered through its shadow, finding in its story not just history, but myth. In the West, the memory of Byzantium was long clouded. Medieval chroniclers saw it as alien, a strange blend of Greek, Roman, and Eastern ways. Renaissance writers, celebrating their own rediscovery of antiquity, sometimes mocked Byzantium as decadent, a faded heir to Rome. The very word Byzantine came to mean convoluted, labyrinthine, corrupt. Yet, even as they dismissed it, Western thinkers could not look away. The empire's fall haunted them, a reminder that even the greatest walls can crumble, even the oldest crowns can shatter. Artists painted the last emperor, Constantine XI, as a tragic hero standing upon the walls, sword in hand, vanishing into legend. For the Greeks, he became a sleeping king, resting beneath the earth until the day his people would rise again. In folk songs and tales, Constantinople was not lost forever but awaited liberation. Memory transformed defeat into prophecy, sorrow into hope. Poets, too, found inspiration in Byzantium's twilight. W.B. Yeats, in the 20th century, wrote of sailing to Byzantium, seeking there a world where art and spirit transcend mortality. To him, Byzantium was no fallen city, but a symbol of eternity, an imagined place where beauty outlives flesh, where the soul finds form in golden mosaics and immortal song. Yeats's poem turned the empire into a metaphor for transcendence, making it a city of the mind as much as of history. Historians, meanwhile, have wrestled with Byzantium's paradoxes. Was it the last Roman Empire, or the first medieval state? Was it Eastern or Western, Christian or Greek, decaying or enduring? The answer is all and none. Byzantium defies categories, slipping through the nets of tidy definitions. Perhaps that is why it fascinates, it resists closure, remaining alive in ambiguity. In modern culture, Byzantium has become a realm of mystery. Filmmakers recreate its glittering palaces. Game designers model its armies and fortresses. Writers imagine its intrigues and splendor. To step into these creations is to glimpse a world both alien and familiar, a mirror of our own ambitions and fragilities. The empire has become not just a subject of history, but a canvas for imagination. For those in the Orthodox world, memory of Byzantium is more than imagination, it is identity. In chants sung each Sunday, in icons kissed by the faithful, in domes gleaming over cities, the empire's heartbeat still sounds. To call a liturgy Byzantine is not to speak of the past, but of the present, alive and unbroken. Yet perhaps Byzantium's greatest legacy in the modern imagination is its lesson about time. The empire reminds us that nothing material endures forever, not walls, not thrones, not treasures. And yet, paradoxically, it shows that spirit and memory can outlive stone. Constantinople's palaces lie in ruin, but its songs still rise. Its emperors are gone, but their laws still guide courts. Its banners no longer fly, but its alphabet still writes the words of millions. This tension between mortality and endurance, between fall and legacy, makes Byzantium not only history, but poetry. It invites us to reflect on our own civilizations, our own ambitions. What will remain of us when our towers fall? What fragments will carry forward into the future? In imagining Byzantium, we are imagining ourselves. So Byzantium endures not as an empire of armies and borders, but as an empire of memory. It lives in archives and liturgies, in paintings and poems, in the dreams of those who hear its story and wonder. It is both ghost and guide, both caution and inspiration. And as long as humanity wonders at the rise and fall of civilizations, Byzantium will not be forgotten. The story of Byzantium is finished, yet not ended. For though the empire itself has passed into the pages of history, its echoes remain in stone and song, in faith and memory. To drift through its tale is to walk along the shore of time, where waves carry fragments of marble, pieces of mosaics, whispers of prayers once sung beneath domes of gold. We began with a small colony by the Bosphorus, chosen by legend, destined by geography. We saw it rise as Constantine's city, crowned with the name of New Rome. We watched it blaze with the ambitions of Justinian, shimmer with mosaics, falter under schisms, and endure through centuries of storms. We felt its walls tremble under the thunder of cannons in 1453, and we followed its spirit as it slipped westward, breathing life into the Renaissance, shaping alphabets, laws, and dreams. And now, in the quiet, we remember. For Byzantium is more than history, it is a mirror. It shows us how civilizations can endure, adapt, and yet eventually fall. It reminds us that no empire, however mighty, escapes time, and it teaches us that what survives is not always stone or crown, but spirit, the faith, the art, the memory passed from one generation to the next. Close your eyes, and you may still hear it, the chants of Hagia Sophia, rising in the glow of lamplight, the murmur of markets along the Golden Horn, the footsteps of emperors pacing marble halls, wondering how long their city would stand. All are gone, yet all remain, for in memory, Byzantium endures. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, carry with you the lesson of that empire between worlds. That beauty can outlive loss. That wisdom can bridge ages. That even when walls fall, memory stands. And if you found yourself wandering through this story, let it stay with you. Share it. Reflect on it. And return again when you wish to walk once more through the Queen of Cities. There are countless stories still waiting of civilizations that rose, fell, and yet live on in us. Good night, and may the echoes of Byzantium guide your dreams.